Hi everyone, it's Lindsay and I am back today to share with you a video on masking complex scenes. So I am going to be using the Let's Celebrate stamp set from Joy Claire Stamps, and the first thing I need to do is make my masks. So what I have here is Inka-Dinka-Doo masking paper. This comes in a pack of 12 and it's these sheets that have a white side and a blue side. Now, what you want to do with this is you want to take your stamp and stamp it down onto the white side of this piece of paper. You can use whatever ink. You can even use this and stamp it off onto the paper after you've stamped onto your project if you want to do it that way. I just find it easier to make my masks in advance and cut them out beforehand. So I am just going to go ahead and make several of these masks. So I'm using a lot of the images from this set. So I will just stamp them on this little piece of paper here. And essentially what this is a really big sticky note. So the entire back of this paper, that blue backing paper, is covering a slightly sticky back. It's not overly tacky, it's like a Post-it note. And I'm putting these as close together on this big piece of paper as I can because I want to use up as much of the surface area as possible. I don't like to have a lot of waste with this. So what I do here is I stamp them as close as possible, and then I just bring in a pair of little scissors that have a fine point on them, and I start to fussy cut them out. Now, if you do not have masking paper, you can always stamp on Post-it notes. Just make sure that you stamp on a side that has a little bit of stickiness on there. You can also stamp on Post-it tape if you have a large enough piece. There's also Eclipse masking paper, which comes in a larger roll. And also, if you don't have any of that, you can stamp on computer paper and apply a little bit of rubber cement to the back and mask your images that way. That works. It's a little bit more time consuming, but it does work, and it's how I mask my digital stamps. So the first thing I want to do is stamp out my little girl. She is going to be in the front of my scene. Now, whenever I'm masking out complex scenes, I like to use a stamp positioner. You don't have to. You can get by with just your acrylic block, and it works perfectly fine. I like to use a stamp positioner because if I do miss stamp or I don't get a good impression the first time, I can easily just stamp again until I get the amount of richness in my color that I want. So that's why I like to do it. And I also get a little bit of playtime with my stamps, so I can see exactly where they're going to stamp before I actually stamp them down. Now, I went ahead and stamped that little girl because she is the front of my scene. So then I went ahead and masked that off. I just put that mask right over the top of the stamped image. And next I'm going to move on to the gift. Now, if you have trouble masking out your scenes, and I've been doing this a while and it's one of my favorite techniques, I do it all the time, so I kind of know how I want my scene to go in my head and I can just stamp it from there. But if you cannot visualize how you want it, you can make yourself a map. So what I mean by that is just cut out the size of rectangle that you're going to use and stamp out your entire scene without any masking, just to get a guide of where you want everything to go and what you need to stamp first and then mask off and then stamp second and so on. And that's going to give you a good idea of how to go about stamping your scene. And even to this day, even though I've stamped out tons and tons and tons of different scenes, even if I have a really complex one where I'm using 2 or 3 different stamp sets to try and create this really intricate design on a card, I will stamp myself a key and a map to kind of get an idea of placement and where I want everything to go beforehand. So then it's just a breeze and a snap for me to get everything placed on my panel without any mistakes. Now, with that being said, if you do make mistakes on masking these more intricate and complex scenes, before you scrap your entire panel that you've worked on, try and figure out a way to fix it or to cover it up in any sort of way, or you might just need to draw in a few lines here and there. Try and really figure out a way to make it work before you completely throw it away. Sometimes in these more intricate scenes, all it takes is one misstamp and your entire scene will be completely off. But if you can figure out a way to fix it, save it, cover it up, whatever you need to do, then you can go about and continue stamping your scene. You don't waste any time and you don't waste any product that way either. So always try and fix it before you throw it away. Now I went ahead and stamped 3 different gifts down at the bottom, and I went ahead and I stood one of the gifts up on its side. And that is a little trick if you're using the same stamp over and over, orientate it a different way so you get a different look from the stamp and it doesn't look like you're using the same stamp over and over. So that's how I got by with stamping 3 different gifts. I just stood one on its side, and that allowed me to have a little bit of a different look to that one, so it doesn't look like I have the same gifts stacked on top of one another. Now I am moving on to stamping out this balloon bunch in the top right hand corner. Now to do this, you really need to pay attention to what you're doing and make sure that you have everything masked that needs to be masked before you go and stamp on top of it. So you'll see here while I'm doing this balloon bunch, I'm going to check and double check, sometimes triple check myself, just to make sure that I have the balloons masked that need to be masked before I stamp on top of them. I have messed up too many projects just by going too quickly. So if you're new to this, even if like myself, I like to slow down on things like this and really double check myself and make sure I have everything in the right position. So I have several different balloons in this stamp set that I can play around with. There are different shapes. I'm going to be using the regular balloon shape, the star, and also the heart. So I'm going to stamp 2 of each of these to make this big balloon bunch. So here you can see I've moved on to the heart, and I'm just going to stamp that off to the right hand side. Now another little tip with stamping all of these intricate scenes is you do not have to mask a lot of the image to make it look like a true scene. You can get by with just doing a corner, a little piece here or there. You don't have to mask out big chunks of it to make it look like it's a bunch. Now in the balloons, as I go along, I need to start masking more and more of them to make them look like a cohesive bunch. However, in the beginning, I'm just cutting out sections here and there, nothing major. So now that I had stamped all of my images once, I'm moving on and stamping them a second time. Now I went ahead and I stamped my regular balloon and my star balloon and finally that heart balloon. Now you can see here I didn't have to do any more masking until I got to this point, and that is adding their little strings. At this point I needed to go ahead and mask all of my little objects, and then I am just orientating my strings different ways, flipping them around, moving them here and there just to make it look like I'm using a different string every time. And I want to make sure that even though you don't see technically 6 balloon little ends on it, you do need 6 strings because you do have 6 balloons in your bunch. So just make sure that you try and figure out how many of these you're going to need before you stamp it. It would look a little funny if you only had 3 strings and 5 balloons. So just make sure that you have the right amount whenever you're stamping. Now the fun part of this is removing all your masks and seeing your complete scene put together. Now when I remove my masks, I do like to save them for future use, and I just put them on the back of the stamp set, the backing sheet. And that allows me to keep the backs nice and clean and sticky. If you want to get even more use out of your masks and make them last even longer, use your tweezers to place them down because the oil from your fingers can get on the back of those, and it does lose a little bit of the stickiness with that. Now I've moved on to coloring this scene, and one of the things I like to do is carry colors across the entire scene. So you can see I colored her hair blonde, so I used some yellows, and then I brought that same yellow up to a balloon. Now I colored a balloon green, so I'm going to bring that balloon down, or that color green, down to the gift as well. So just make sure you're not throwing in different colors here and there. You just want to continue using those same colors across the entire scene to make it look more cohesive. And also, you do want to make sure you think about your coloring medium beforehand, because you do want to use an ink that will play nicely with whatever coloring medium you are using to color in your scene. Now, coloring in these more complex scenes is another thing that you want to take your time with, because not in this scene necessarily, it wasn't very confusing. However, if you have a lot of the same items masked up against each other, it can get a little confusing of what you're coloring in, so just take your time when doing it. So once I had all of my little images colored in, I did have a little bit of bleeding around them. So what I did was I just took a white gel pen, since the area around all of my colored in items was white, and I just cleaned up the edges very quickly. And there I have my scene entirely masked out, colored in, ready to be put on a card panel. Now I did want to add just a few little touches to each one of the balloons. I came back in with my white gel pen and added little highlights to make them look more rounded. And that is just something I've picked up from looking at other people's coloring. They do this a lot, and it's a very striking technique to do on different rounded objects like this. So the last thing to do was put this card together. So I went ahead and added some double-sided adhesive to the back of the colored panel, and I am just going to adhere this onto a slightly larger scalloped rectangle that I die cut from some craft cardstock. Then that entire panel is going to be popped up with some fun foam and double-sided adhesive onto an A2 top folding white card base. Now whenever you're doing cards like this, I try to keep the overall design pretty simple because I have put so much effort into masking out and coloring in this scene. I don't add a lot of extra interest to this. So you can see here that it's pretty much going to be just popping these up, adding some dimension to different elements, and that will finish off the card. So I went ahead and stamped the Celebrate sentiment from the stamp set onto a white banner. I just popped that up with some more fun foam and double-sided adhesive and just chopped off the end. You probably want to do this beforehand. You can see I'm struggling here to get it cut evenly up against that panel, but I did get it eventually. And then for the tiniest bit of embellishment, I did come in and add just a few of Ranger's enamel accents and black tie. And I just added a few here and there just for a little bit more interest and a little bit more dimension to this project. But once I had all of those little dots of enamel accents down, this card was finished. I hope you guys enjoyed this video tutorial, and I hope I gave you a few tips and tricks of how I like to mask out my scenes that you can take and do in your card making as well. As always, I will leave you with this close-up of the finished card and a few pictures as well. For more information and the supply list, you can head to my blog. That link is in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for watching.